Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cobbles Cols podcast. This week we have Ed Pickering, who's the editor of Rouleur. I was, like Jason Derulo, flying solo this week because, NJ, what were you up to, mate?
I was moving house. And with this moving house, moved to a house that's never had internet, which means there's no broadband wires, which means I had to find alternative routes to getting internet. But luckily, we managed to get a 5G broadband as a temporary fix. I think my Wi-Fi is now sorted. I was spending like hours on the phone to Zen, having BT OpenReach come around and fit the fibers. We may still have some unstable connections, but we are back. We can go live like the Death Star. We are fully operational, as he says.
See on the podcast. Come.
I was going to say, as for anyone viewing on YouTube, you see that I got the decks are behind me, the vinyls are behind me. You see a Jan Auric book if you squint hard enough, and you got the classic Spiky, which when I bought was in good health, and now it's leaning over and flopping, and you know just how everyone's houseplants go, slightly dead but also alive.
So on the podcast, what did we? I think you listened to it right when you were in the edit. I think it was quite interesting.
It was good.
It's been in the cycling industry for a long time. I think he spoke a lot about kind of the changes that it's been through. And now being the editor of Rouleur, really what makes Rouleur. Obviously, Rouleur Live, this coming out will be the following week. So we'll see you all there. Looking forward to seeing everyone. There's going to be an event I'll put in our Strava group if people want to meet on the Saturday. We're going to go to the pub, which we talked about last week, and I still haven't looked up where it is. So as soon as we get off this intro, I will actually do that. Pretty interesting stuff on the podcast, especially kind of Ed's musical talents in the Japanese drumming band that he's been in for 20 years. I spoke to him kind of after the podcast ended.
Yeah.
Really, really interesting. So we'll put that in the show notes. If you're around then in Blackheath, go and see it. But yeah, what did you think about the podcast that we recorded, NJ?
I thought it was good. So obviously, I enjoyed that. I guess he hasn't always been at Rouleur, so he had the outside view of what Rouleur was like, and then the inside view of Rouleur, which is quite a good topical insight into, I guess, how it was viewed and how it's viewed whilst being in there. The fact he's gone from like Japan to head of Rouleur is also interesting. How he wanted to be a teacher without giving too much away. There's all the I guess the ins and outs of that sort of how Rouleur Live is set up, and how he's basically encouraging all the guests there. Don't feel scared to go talk to them because they're there because they want to be talked to. So just go and approach them. Think of your one line. If not, there's some AI tools out there that you can be like, what's a good icebreaker for a cycling event? And I'm sure some crazy stuff will come up. maybe we'll use that. Go up to some cyclists with a chatbot, and we'll report back to see if it works. Live in the field.
We're getting replaced by ChatGPT. Is that what you're really saying?
Yeah. Well, we're not. It's the people who use it will replace us. That's the new insight on the grapevine. AI isn't going to replace you. The person using AI will replace you. So we will keep up with the times with our networking.
Right. Well, I think we said to the people that, as they had, the Wi-Fi situation at your house is work in progress, and we're going to start recording very soon, and the episode's going out. So be probably an intermission of a couple of weeks whilst you're fully operational.
We recorded one before we went on the break. So see us all both in our old houses with my old glasses on. It'll be like a rewind. And then I guess we'll flash back to the present.
Correct. So come and see us. We'll be there on the Saturday at Rouleur Live. Hope you enjoy the podcast. But I say goodbye from me. You're about to
No,
listen to it.
because
So anyway.
yeah. Also, I'd say you can come up to us, as you'll know who we are, but we won't know who you are if you listen to the show. So just come up and just start speaking to us.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, speak to you all soon.
On to the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Cobbles and Cols podcast. This week, got Ed Pickering. Ed is the editor-in-chief of Rouleur. He's also an author, musician, and a journalist. Ed, welcome to the podcast, mate.
Thank you for having me on.
So, long-time listeners will know we typically break this podcast into three component parts, which is, who are you, how'd you get into cycling? Part two, I thought we'd really talk to Ed about Rouleur Live, journalism, cycling industry, his books, which I've read. Rhonda, it's an incredible book, so plug that in there, and whatnot. And then the third part, we'll do our usual Q&A. And based on Ed's authorship, I think I know where he sits on the kind of the cobbles or mountains. So jumping straight in, Ed, why don't you tell the people, who you are, maybe how you got into cycling to start off with?
Yeah, very long story. So, like I said, my name's Edward Pickering. I'm the editor of Rouleur magazine. Been there for 2.5 years now. Been a cycling journalist for coming up to 23 years now. Started at Cycling Weekly. There was a sister magazine, Cycling Weekly, called Cycle Sport, which is much more my area of interest. So I kind of inveigled myself into the deputy editorship of Cycle Sport for a few years. Then became editor of Pro Cycling. And that's job that I had immediately before Rouleur. So been a cycling journalist for over 20 years. Been interested in the sport for coming up to 40 years now. I first encountered cycling as a sport when I caught a glimpse of the 1985 Tour de France on television. I was 12 years old at that point. I was very into running and athletics. It was kind of around. It's a few years after the Moscow Olympics where GB did very well in the track and field, and I was hooked on athletics. I was also a Francophile because my father was a French teacher, and we'd been on a couple of family holidays to France, and I found France to be exotic and interesting, and had very nice food. So I got really into France. I just caught a glimpse of the Tour de France on television, and it instantly grabbed me. And we didn't have wall-to-wall coverage. It was I think that was the first year of daily 30-minute shows on Channel 4. But there was just something about it. It was a mountain stage. It was won by I think it was either Fabio Aru or Luis Herrera, and it had mountains, crowds, colour, and noise. It kind of seemed to be like track and field, only far more exotic, interesting, and cosmopolitan.
Yeah, and also maybe a bit more European than a kind of a cold and windy track and field meet in kind of Middle England to an extent.
Yeah, exactly. It spoke to the Francophile in me as well, because it evidently wasn't just about the race. I could see that after just a couple of days of watching the stages, that it wasn't just about the race. The race was interesting. I was getting into that, but I was also interested in the wide shots of France. The TV camera dwelled on chateau or the mountains or the crowds, and I could immediately tell there was a lot to this sport. And I spent the subsequent 40 years finding out that the more you learn, the more there is to learn about cycling. So that's kind of what grabbed me in the first place. And as I got interested in the sport and I was into running, I also got into cycling my bike as well. So I've spent many years as a cyclist also.
And I mean, from then on, so your love for the classics. Do you think it's a lot? Because do you think it's a lot like a lot of people? So I think there's a lot of casual fans. So you watch Tour de France, or maybe you catch the coverage on ITV4. Although I think I read in the paper a couple of days ago that's actually sadly going. And a lot of people might remember Phil Liggett's commentary and whatnot. So so it was more be like the more casual fan, and then I think you get quite hooked onto it, and then you're maybe watching all of the stages or you're watching the highlights, and then I think the progression of that is to go really deep to an extent and then to be watching the classics, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think I'd describe the Tour de France as my gateway drug into cycling. We're talking about the mid-'80s, so I couldn't start getting interested in the Giro d'Italia and the classics because they were not on television. They were not on television for a very long time.
Yeah.
But I did become aware of them. I got into the Tour de France, and I knew the milk race, which the old Tour of Britain used. I'd heard of that. That been through Exeter, my hometown. And I'd actually seen a movie about it when I went to watch a movie, and they used to show films before the main
my
film.
event. Yeah,
there was a 30-minute or 20-minute thing about the milk race, and I thought that looked quite interesting, so I was aware of that. It took me a while to learn that there was also a Tour of Italy, a Giro d'Italia, and of Spain, and I learned that, and I kind of vaguely became aware of that, and started buying cycling magazines. It was only then that I realised that it was actually a sport that went from the start of the year to the end and had races all the way through. I thought when I started, I was so green. I thought the Tour de France. I thought people only raced the Tour de France, and there was no information out there to inform me otherwise.
I think so. I'm 31, right? So I remember I was watching the Tour de France at the end of when Lance Armstrong finished. So about 2004, 2005, that kind of era. And obviously he used to do the Dauphiné as a warm-up, and he only really used to race the Tour de France. So I think I'm of that similar ilk where, I only thought it was the Tour de France, and I thought cyclists geared up all year, because NJ and I talk about this all the time. I can't find it on YouTube anymore, but there's a documentary about Lance preparing for the Tour, and he goes and meets this man that's curing his tyres underneath his house like fine wine. And I think because, again, it was ITV4, it was Phil Liggett, Chris Boardman, kind of when the Schlecks were around, that was when he came on the part of the commentary team. And I think it's the similar sort of way, right? But the Tour de France is the gateway drug. And then I think, not to talk too much drug policy, but then when you get onto the classics, that's really where the fun starts.
Well, exactly. You learn it's a multi-layered, textured sport, and that little segue about curing tyres. That's a very cycling thing, isn't it? There's not many sports where we could talk about that. I don't know of footballers going to see their boots being the leather for their boots being cured, but that's a very cycling thing, and it's what I've always loved about cycling. What I continue to love about it is you can be interested on a very simple level that you want to see who wins the bike race and enjoy that, because some people are into competitive sport because they like seeing winners and losers. They may invest themselves in one rider or another rider, but they essentially want to find out what happens in the race. There's a winner, there are some people in the top 10, and so on down. And if your interest goes that far, that's absolutely fine, and cycling will reward that interest. At the same time, if you do want to go more deep, you want to start watching other races, or you want to start getting interested in chateau in the French countryside, or art or literature or culture or politics, cycling's a window onto those things as well. And it is a multi-layered sport. You can start getting interested in the strategy and the tactics and the ramifications and the numbers, if that's your thing, and be interested on that level. And it is equally rewarding to people who want to get into the depth, as well as to the people who just want to find out who wins the bike race at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I mean, for people who watch this on YouTube, they might be able to see that you've got an incredible amount of cycling books about kind of from Roche to Bjorn Ries to everybody. And reading your book,
my shoulder, really,
that's incredible. Yeah, and I mean, like reading your book, it focuses on, a certain Tour of Flanders, but it's shot in anecdotally of other races as well. Talking of the stories of cycling and whatnot. Is there any from that period of when you started in the 80s? Because there's been some incredible, tours. There's the Fignon where he lost because, let's face it, he had a ponytail, and wasn't going aero, or Marco Pantani, that's NJ's favourite cyclist. But is there any stories in there which you think are kind of unearthed or stick with you?
From the 80s?
Yeah, or kind of over your period of of watching the Tour de France or the classics, really?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, I consider myself extremely fortunate to have been born when I was born and to fall into watching cycling when I did. I mean, if I couldn't have done it 2 years earlier. 2 years later, I might have been too much into music to get into cycling. So my timing was, I couldn't have timed it better. And I was also lucky, excuse me, that my interest in cycling, watching Tour de France, coincided with an absolutely spectacular run of exciting tours. I think 84 was just before, but I read about it. 84 was an amazing tour. 83 was a fascinating tour. 85 had that Le Mans internecine battle between the team. 86, Le Mans revenge the next year when his teammate was attacking him again. 87, the very close year that Roach beat Delgado, but also won the Triple Crown, which is relevant this year. 88, real stinker, unfortunately, very, very dull tour. 1989, the greatest tour there has ever been. For me, the greatest bike race there has ever been and ever will be, because I was 16. It was colourful, bright. For me, it's kind of a touchstone in my life, and it coincided with my, that kind of transition from being a teenager, moving towards adulthood, and so I was lucky that run of tours was spectacularly interesting because there wasn't much else out there. I mean, I started buying cycling magazines around 87, 88, and that was my window into the sport, but I think that 80s, that stretch of the 80s, between 83 and maybe 1990, or to the first Indurain Tour in 1991, I think it was a golden era in cycling, and it's the era that grabbed me. And it wasn't just the sport that grabbed me. I think I was grabbed by the sport in a very very fascinating era for it.
Fair. I mean, then kind of moving forward to working in journalism. So I know at the time I spoke to somebody a couple of weeks ago that was saying Cycling Weekly was the publication. It was where you found out about races. It's where you found out about people are up to. And, now we're in a period of, social media, big websites, big media traffic, forums and whatnot. What do you think has kind of changed in that time? Because the personalities, I'd say, are still just as magnetic, right? And the stories are there, that they're just told in many different ways. What do you think how it's perceived, from your angle? What do you think the major changes from where it was all magazine based and short online to now where there's so much more media for cycling?
Yeah, thank you for making me feel old. Yeah, I've seen massive change. And my career has spanned those changes because I went to university in the early to mid 90s and went to live abroad, and the internet was still in its infancy. I kind of saw the internet start to grow and become a thing, and then I landed in cycling journalism in the early 2000s, and it was still cycling news was just about up and running. I used to read it when I lived in Japan in the late 90s, and it was Bill's cycling results, and that was my way of accessing the cycling scene. They weren't selling Cycling Weekly in Japanese news agents. my dad would post me Cycle Sport, but there was always a lag with Cycle Sport, and then it'd get around to posting it, then it would have to get service mail to Japan, and I'd be several months late with the news. So the internet, I was aware that the internet was becoming a way of accessing information as it grew. And then when I started in cycling journalism, it was still very magazines based. The websites hadn't taken off. The websites means Cycling News, and most sites were very small, very, very amateur, and weren't sending anybody anywhere, or they were still pretty small. And I think I experienced the end of the golden age of magazines, because there were so many, and that was the exclusive way that people accessed information. The magazines were the be all and end all of cycling journalism in the UK. Cycling Weekly was our only way of finding out what had been going on. By Winning and Cycle Sport as well, but they were the window onto the sport. And then by 2 or 3 years into my cycling career, the internet was huge, and we started, spreading things out a bit more. There was information coming from magazines, but also from websites. Less than 10 years into my, only 6 or 7 years into my journalism career, social media started really taking off. Twitter started really growing in 08, 09, didn't it? And I'd only been a cycling journalist a few years by that point, 6 years. Most of my cycling career has taken place now in the new media and social media age, and continues to evolve. I mean, podcasts have exploded in the last 10 years. The video equivalent is also growing massively. And yes, at the same time, I love, and the subscribers to Rouleur still love magazines, love the physical product and the care that goes into it and the depth that we can go into and the kind of the aesthetic of it. And to me, it shows there's a niche for everything.
I mean, well, I'd like to go into that more in a bit. Well, maybe I'll just ask you one last question about like the stories and whatnot. Do you think that this might be a bit metaphysical for people on the Northern Line going to the office, but do you think that with social media, video and whatnot, and where before you might have read these kind of mythological stories about, Bernardino and Greg LeMond battling it out, and you'd read it in text, and now it's much more accessible. Do you think that we'll look back on this period of cycling as we did of the 80s, when it was still kind of a bit, for lack of a better phrase, a bit more analog than it is now?
No, I don't think we will. I think we know too much now. Or, not that we know too much, but we know so much. Something that actually, one of the things I liked about cycling when I got into it was the mystery, and that air of mystery and exoticism and cosmopolitanism, and just the idea of a world that was one step removed from the life I lived in the UK was very, very appealing. And it's true that the information was much more sparse and much more slow moving, and that was the way it was. It was less sparse and faster moving than it was 20 years previously to that. With colour photography and much more coverage of bike races from the 80s onwards. There was a big Anglophone interest in the Tour de France from the mid 80s because of Greg LeMond winning, and so it's always evolved and changed and grown. But I think, as fans of the sport, and even I think the journalists at the time, were very far removed from the reality, and stories were smaller. Now riders put a lot on their social media. We see there's bike racing every day of the year if you want to watch it. We can watch racing just wall to wall, and it used to be the case that somebody would pop up in the Tour de France and you hadn't really heard of them. I remember, I think, Alex Zuller doing well in a poll. I was like, this guy sounds interesting. Like these days, we'd have tracked him from his junior years, all his results through under 23, and known about him, in depth, because there's so much more information out there. Has some mystery been lost? Yes, it has, but that's true across the board. I was, at the same time as finding the sport exotic, I was craving more information back in the 90s. I didn't know about the Tour of Flanders till 3 or 4 years into being a cycling fan. It was a different time, and I enjoy explaining to my kids how things were back in the day, and no doubt they think I'm some kind of dinosaur, but I think the knowledge and information and access that fans have now it's a completely different thing, but it's a great thing. We are much closer to the sport. We know the sport a lot better.
Perfect. Well, look, maybe with that in mind, we'll head to a break, section 2, and we can speak about Rouleur Live, and some other great things. Thank you. This podcast is brought to you by our friends at Rouleur Live. Rouleur Live, the world's greatest cycling show, is coming to the Truman Brewery in London from the 14th to the 16th of November. This is your chance to see cycling royalty live on stage. With legends like Tom Pidcock, Kasia Niewiadoma, Luke Rowe, and many more already confirmed, every talk alone is worth the ticket. Plus, you'll experience over 70 of the best cycling brands under one roof, showcasing incredible products, exclusive memorabilia, and one-of-a-kind items ridden by the legends of our sport. Rouleur Live is more than an event. It's a celebration of cycling culture. Brought to you by Rouleur magazine, this is your chance to immerse yourself in the stories, products, and the people that make cycling extraordinary. Whether you're an old hand or a casual rider, you'll find something to enjoy in this fun, friendly atmosphere. Tickets are available at rouleur.cc/live. Don't miss out on the ultimate celebration of cycling. Link is in the show notes. NJ and I are going to be there on the 3 days, so if you fancy grabbing a pint, come and find us. Anyway, let's go back to the podcast. Welcome back, everybody. Section 2. I thought we'd talk this part about Rouleur, the magazine, Rouleur Live, and all things part of the group. So, Ed, we were talking before about kind of print journalism, and I was pleased to see that Rouleur's subscriber numbers are going up, and the participants in Rouleur Live is increasing. Maybe can you just give us an understanding of what's the special sauce of Rouleur? Right, it's a very specific magazine, and it's incredible, aesthetically, journalistically.
Thank you. Yes, no, it is. It's like I said, there was a golden era for magazines, and I don't know that we're in a golden era for magazines now. However, Rouleur, it's hard to say what the secret sauce is, because we do quite a simple thing, but the important thing is we do it well. We put fascinating, amazing, interesting, high quality writing alongside beautiful, stunning photography, quite elegantly on paper. That it's not really that. It sounds obvious, but I think there's something magical about it, and I think the physical magazine is it's not just very pleasant reading experience. It's nice to read. We lay it out very carefully. We spend a lot of time agonizing over picture choice, about layout and order of features, structure of features, how much space we give them, etc., and who we use to write the features in the first place, and where we get our photography from. Immersive experience reading it. And I think that because it's paper and because it's analog, there are no distractions. We make it especially for the reader, and I think that in doing that we create a relationship with the reader which is intimate, meaningful, and less interruptible than if you're reading a website where you're scrolling and easily distracted. There are links and ads popping up, and you may be looking on your phone in the 10 seconds that you have between doing one thing and another. So it's an immersive reading experience, and I think readers appreciate that. And I think we are paying our readers a compliment that they appreciate quality journalism, they appreciate learning about new things, they appreciate the sport and its aesthetic and its iconography, and that's it. I think we don't make it complicated. There are no links to click on in a magazine. We've obviously bolstered our business with Rouleur Live, which is going from strength to strength. We have a travel business. We have a podcast and a website also, and all those things are very interlinked and very everything is to do with everything else. We're not siloed. But at the end of the day, I think we like putting great words and pictures elegantly laid out in the way of our readers, and it's as simple as that.
I think you're right. Like I think it's probably, even to use a cycling term, an aggregation of things, right? And I think it's even maybe 10 to 15% is actually the paper. The front is that slightly matte. Sometimes it's embossed, or I think that's also what it comes down to. It's quite a tangible thing to pick up a magazine, and you kind of a quality thing. It kind of dictates the rest of the content on the inside to an extent, I feel.
Yeah, exactly. I love printed matter. I do have a Kindle app on my phone, but I never ever use it. I like reading books. I like the physicality. I like the ability to flick through them, and I know there's no search facility, but I can do that on my Kindle and then cross-reference if I need to. But I do prefer the physical print. I prefer printed matter. Always have done. Always will. And you can see from the book. I mean, this is just the cycling books. I've got another few thousand cycling books. My wife insists I keep my cycling books in here, but I think it's akin to the same sensation that you get or the same feeling or emotions you experience when you go to a really nice restaurant and you know that the chef is really crafting incredible food for you. It's not fast food. It's not one size fits all. It might be what they've had in this week, and they're doing wonders with that. And that kind of slow food movement, I think it appeals to the same kind of people who maybe enjoy or appreciate live music compared to recorded music. It's just something. There's something more contemplative about having printed matter, and it's a deliberate thing. I'm very conscious of the physical presence of the magazine in my hands, and I'm still, after 22 years of working in cycling magazines, I'm still really excited when the new edition lands on my doormat. And the things I've read the magazine back to front about 10 times by that point.
You've seen it for a Mac. You've seen it for a Mac and typeface and everything.
Exactly. Yeah. And I've dissected it and corrected it, and hopefully no typos have got through, and made changes and tweaked it and read it and reread it and proofed it and sent things backwards and forwards. And even before it's laid out, I've read each feature 3 times. And so I know the magazine, and I don't need to read the magazine again to learn anything new particularly, but I still, when I get the magazine, it's a different experience for me, even having read it before several times digitally, that to have it in my hands is still exciting to me. And it's not just since I've been a cycling journalist. I have always loved magazines. I've got every edition of Winning. I used to buy Winning back when I was a cycling fan in the 80s. I've got most cycling weeklies from the last 70 years. I'm missing a few, but I'll track them down and get them eventually. And that's that. So I always used to be excited when the new Winning came out. I knew which day it was coming out. I would go to W Smith's and Exeter, and I would be just excited to see who they'd chosen for their cover pick, and buy the magazine, then read the stories, and it was all new and exciting. And I was getting goosebumps about saying this. This is ridiculous. I've always been really, really excited by just the idea of a magazine where a group of people work together to put this thing in your hands and entertain, educate, and inform you. And that feeling has never left me. I still get it when the new magazine lands on my doorstep now.
So, speaking of that, what makes a Rouleur story? How do you decide? Maybe this is the secret sauce. This is editorial, writer's room, 2:00 in the morning Zoom calls trying to figure it out. What goes into a Rouleur story? How would you guys decide the things you want to follow up on? How does that process kind of work with you guys?
Quite funny. Again, the funny thing is about this, that anything goes with Rouleur. I mean, obviously, it's got to be good. But I worked close to 20 years in much more traditionally sport-focused magazines like Cycling Weekly, Cycle Sport, Pro Cycling. I loved all those magazines, and I thought they've all done great jobs. But they had parameters where Pro Cycling and Cycle Sport, for example, we covered international professional road racing, and that was it. There were interviews with pros, features about races, race photography, and it was focused about the races and the people who raced. Whereas Rouleur, I think, is not just a cycling magazine. I'll describe it as a cycling adjacent magazine. I think the beauty of Rouleur is that, as I said at the very beginning of our conversation, cycling can take you to some very interesting places, not just to do with sport. I find cycling is a window on culture, politics, geography, history, everything, meteorology, just landscape, you name it. you can find where cycling has a link with it, because cycling as a sport takes place out in the real world, and it's the unique thing about cycling. And as a sport, it takes place in the real world, and I think it's fair game for us to also write about the real world and cycling's interaction with it. So the classic, well, there's no classic rouleur feature, or no ways, but we do. The magazines rhyme a little bit. Like we tend to try to have interviews with prominent people from the world of cycling in the magazine. I am a sucker for landscape photography in cycling, and we've got a regular explore feature where we have features about rides, and the photography is very important in that. It's the beauty. We all talk about the beauty of cycling. We know why it's beautiful. It's because the landscape is just stunning. Cycling is lucky to have the greatest stadium in the world. So I like to have landscape features in there. But beyond that, our staff photographer, James Start, he, like me, has an art history degree. We bonded very early over our art history interest and degree. And he said, why don't we do a series about the relationship between art and cycling? And we started this over 2 years ago. It's been going almost, I think we missed one magazine, but it's been every edition since. There has been classic artwork that has some link with cycling, and we've done a feature about it. It's only 3 or 4 pages in the magazine, so it's not big, but it's kind of part of the structure and the skeleton of the magazine. And James has done incredibly interesting things with that, and that is a feature that is essentially about art and art history, but it is also about cycling, and therefore it's fine to go in Rouleur. I love reflective pieces where writers kind of explore emotions, psychology, maybe their personal stories, and how that relates to cycling. We've got a fantastic feature coming up in the upcoming numbers edition of Rouleur, which is out sometime very soon, by our Italian writer Davide Mazzocco. And he has kept a training diary since he was, I think, 13 or 14.
Wow.
Since 1990. He's about to say he's a similar age to me. He got interested in cycling around the same time as me. His grandfather actually participated in the Giro d'Italia, so he's got a family history as well. But he started logging his rides, and he has done ever since. And on the surface of it, all he does, he records distance, altitude, all that kind of, so all the numbers stuff that we're all recording on Strava now, I guess. And he's been doing this for nigh on 35 years. And you'd think this is a piece about recording gradients and numbers and distances and rides, and that's what his diaries record. But the feature is not about that at all. It's about what these diaries say about his relationship with cycling and how profound it is. And they may be dry and factual in terms of the information the diaries present, but they're like a repository of his cycling memories. He can look back at a ride and remember the smell of the pine trees, or the view, or just the emotions he felt on rides. Or the first time he rode up Sestriere, I think I sensed that Sestriere in Italy is a real touchstone for him. And so that kind of piece it will always have a home in Rouleur. And I think beyond that, I spent a few years as a teacher. My father was a teacher. I'm a great believer in the empowering force of education to make lives better. And I, as editor of the magazine, I want our features to teach our readers something. And it might be something small, it might be something big, and that's why I love it. I love it when writers insert random historical events or manage to link things up with local culture, because I just think, A, it's educational, and learning things is a good thing, and B, it demonstrates the texture and complexity and interest that cycling has. And I love having those features in Rouleur. And beyond that, I don't like to impose rules, because that means we might end up turning down cool pitches, and I never like to do that.
I love it. That's so good. That's kind of that's genuinely what I hoped it would be. So yeah, that's fantastic. I just need to pivot myself from a spreadsheet building person to a writing person, and maybe there could be something. So, moving on to Rouleur Live, it seems to be going from strength to strength. I've been the past 3 years. Typically always on a Saturday, but going on Thursday as well this year. That's also a mass or a big cycling event that's kept a lot of the people that came 3 years ago, or are newer to cycling, and it just seems to build. Maybe give a bit of an idea where you guys see Rouleur Live, because it's a key thing in the calendar for London cyclists now.
Yeah, it is getting to be the big kind of off-season bash, the big celebratory get-together bash. And you've actually been more times than me. I've done 2 Rouleur Lives as editor. And before, it's funny when I was. I mean, this is a mark of how good I think Rouleur Live is. I used to studiously ignore it when I was editor pro cycling, so I was kind of conscious that there was this very, very cool thing going on that was not to do with pro cycling. It used to really kind of make me quietly seethe that this cool thing was going on, and it wasn't to do with the magazine I was working at the time. Happily, I'm now at Rouleur, and I get to say that I can confirm that Rouleur Live is indeed an amazing event. And what we try to do, I mean, it's growing every year, and from what people have told me, it's just getting bigger and better every year. I should give credit to Ken Pritchard, who has organised the last 2. He's standing on the shoulder of giants, and it's been a brilliant concept from the start. That Ken is really imaginative. Ken's a big fan of music festivals, and we've exchanged many stories and anecdotes about Glastonbury. And we talk about things that we've seen there and how that could translate to Rouleur Live. It's why we've got a second stage at Rouleur Live that started last. Ken and I were talking, we could have the other stage at Glastonbury. Let's have that at Rouleur Live as well. And so Ken has done incredible things, and it just looks amazing. Last year was a real step up. It looked fantastic. The artwork on the walls, the way the stands were presented, the stage show, the second stage was incredible. And it's just a big kind of real world representation of Rouleur and its community. And the community, it's not just the people who make the magazine. It's not the people we interview and cover in the magazine and the brands that there. It's also our readers, cycling fans, and the whole cycling community. And I love Rouleur Live. It's so goddamn noisy, you can't hear yourself think. And that noise is people talking excitedly about cycling. And it's you can feel the buzz when you walk in. You get that kind of warm, going into a nightclub feeling that you get when you suddenly leave the kind of grey outside world behind and go into a place which is full of promise and excitement. And you meet old friends there and have a chat with them. You meet new friends. There's a lot of very, very interesting people there. You can just strike up conversations with the guy standing next to a stand, the guy you happen to be sitting next to if you're at one of the stage talks. We put on an amazing set of stage talks with the very biggest stars
in the business. Yeah, they are. We've got Kasia Niewiadoma, Tom Pidcock, Luke Rowe, Alejandro Valverde. Like that in itself, it's big, huge thing.
Yeah, it is. Greg LeMond is coming this year.
I saw that.
When that one was confirmed, as a mid-80s cycling fan, that's the most amazing thing. I know there'll be a lot of people around my age in the audience enjoying listening to Greg talk, because Greg's incredibly generous with his time and insight. So we get the biggest rides in the world. We've got Kasia Niewiadoma who won. I said my one true love in cycling races is the 1989 Tour de France, but I do genuinely believe that the Tour de France Femmes this year was, from a sporting perspective, one of the greatest races there has ever been. It was up there with the very greatest in my bit. Is in my top 3 races, definitely ever. It was brilliant. And we've got the winner on the stage. We've got Lizzie Diagnon's coming to give a talk. Luke Rowe's going to do a live recording of what's going with Sean Kelly, I believe. Sean Kelly is there. It's going to be great to see him and Greg LeMond in the same room. But we've also, we've got quite a diversity of riders as well. It's not just roadies. We've got Safa Bryan, YouTube influencer. Lachlan Morton's gonna sharp. He's gonna talk about his 30-day ride around Australia recently. And we've got gravel stars being Peter Stettner, who used to be a roadie but is now a gravel racer, and Maddie Nutt. And we're trying to reflect. We're trying to hold a mirror up to the cycling world and show the cycling world just how cool it is, and also add a little Rouleur twist onto everything. But for me, going to Rouleur Live, it's like reading a printed magazine. It's not quite the same as watching stuff on television. Like you could have these talks on a computer screen or on a screen. Wouldn't be the same when you're there in the room, enjoying that kind of warm, intimate conversation with a good few hundred, over 1,000 other cycling fans. There's something magical and special about it, and I love it. I can't wait for this year's.
Do you know what? Rouleur Live's the genesis of this podcast, funnily enough. So, NJ and I, people know this story. We went cycling on the Isle of Wight. The place you can go and have fun without having a good time. And we decided, hey, we'll launch a podcast, just figure out who people are, how do groups form, personalities, because everybody hears something or reads something or talks to each other, and it's just kind of like, this is what this is, like a little cafe chat. You meet someone for the first time, you have a chat about their life. So this is where this podcast genesis was. And the other part about that same Rouleur, I believe that was the one that Johan Musea was at. And we walked through, and he was in the cafe, and I went, fucking hell, I think that's Johan Musea there. And it was. Came and talked to him, and so yes, it was. It's great. I also think that, and this has been talked about on the podcast lots of times with lots of different people, that cycling, to an extent, is quite an individual sport. It is, right? Like, you're the only one that you can't cycle with the group every time, or you're watching Tour de France. It's usually a pretty individual pursuit. And, you might be talking to people on Instagram, or you might see people on Instagram. And then I think when you go to Rouleur Live, you, like you said, it's a bit like going to the old Ministry of Sound. When you come off the street and it goes up a spiral staircase and there's just a wall of noise. It's that. And I think when you go through and you start seeing some of the people or you meeting some of your cycling friends, for a lot of my people that I know, it's the first time I'm seeing them in civvies. And I think that's it's also just fundamentally a great place for people to go and hang out. I always go and sit on the Wahoo sofa and just drink their beer and wait for people to come and have a look.
You should do that. And what you said about Johan Musea is true. It's like you never know who you're going to see and bump into a Rouleur Live, and it's fine to just go up and chat. That's that they wouldn't be there if they didn't want to have chats. Have chats with people. So those kind of random encounters are part of the magic of Rouleur Live. I love it.
What are you looking forward to most this time around? It's the stack schedule.
Greg LeMond, absolutely. Funny enough, he's headlining on Saturday, so the best is being held to last for me. But for me, he was my hero when I discovered cycling. He was narrowly beaten in the Tour de France and then won the Tour de France in fascinating circumstances, and he had me hooked. And they say don't meet your heroes, but I've met him several times. He's a gentleman. He's a really, really special human being. I love being in the same room as him. I don't get to do it very often, but it's a privilege to be in the same room as Greg LeMond. And the irony is about I'm not very techie with bikes at all. I kind of point and say that's a red bike or that's a blue bike. I'm not that into that kind of thing. But I do, funnily enough, enjoy going around the stands at Rouleur Live and seeing what bike tech is doing these days. It is fascinating, and the our commercial partners really do bring out their best stuff for it. It's incredible hardware that they have on show, and though I'm not an expert on it, I can see the beauty, the technology, and how interesting it is. And seeing them engaging the public is also pretty inspiring. I'm looking forward to the more impromptu talks, like Luke Rowe doing a recording with Sean Kelly. That's a bit less structured, and you never know what you're going to get with those
with the
sessions.
both of them. Yeah.
But it's a lot of fun, that. And then there's a lot of creative stuff which we just kind of fill the spaces with. We've got a lot of exhibits from our commercial partners. We've got the stages. So what do we do with all these bare walls where we put editions of the magazine, all the covers of the magazine? We've had art installations from it's a Belgian art collective who do us an installation every year. We have old bikes on display. We had
the Bianchi one last year. That was cool.
Yeah, and old jerseys. And James Start had an exhibition of his photography, his award-winning cycling photography. So there's lots there. It is like it's like an edition of the magazine. It's got a lot of depth, texture, different layers to it.
Amazing. Well, look, maybe with that in mind, we'll head to section 3 Q&A. Cheers. Welcome back, everybody. Section 3, the Q&A, the things everybody's been waiting for. So we'll do this as quick or as slow as you want, but I think people are always keen to hear kind of life off the bike and whatnot. But maybe we'll start with a cafe. Where's your favourite cafe? Where are you stopping where you are? You're based in Exeter, right? Where would you, if people are cycling in your area, where would you recommend people go?
Got two recommendations. The Old Forge in Chagford. Does the best cream teas I've ever had. It's on Chagford's on the edge of Dartmoor. Well, it's actually in Dartmoor. So long, hard, chilly ride over the moor. You need a cream tea, and all the calories are justified. So it really is absolutely incredible. And the chef does little special blowtorched marshmallows for the kids as well. So that's good. And in Exeter, my favourite cafe is the Boston Tea Party, which is a little mini chain of cafes in the southwest of England. But I think the original might have been in Exeter, and it's a beautiful. It's an old post office sorting room. It's a big open space with big windows, and the sun shines in the afternoon. So it's a lovely space to work and have coffee.
Fair. I mean, as I said at the start of this podcast, this informs what we do here, but cobbles or mountains? Watching, riding, where are you on this debate?
Definitely mountains. I know I've written a book about the Tour of Flanders, and I do extol the virtues of cobbles for televised cycling enjoyment, but I am a mountains guy. I've heard various different people say that you're either a mountains guy or a sea guy, and I'm a mountains guy. I love being in the mountains. I love being on high ground, and obviously they're a big part of cycling as well. But I'm quite happy up at high altitude.
Fair. I mean, then for people who don't know, why don't you tell us something about you outside of cycling? What do you do in your spare time other than raising children and writing books?
Job's almost done there. My kids are 16 and 18, so they are almost done. So outside cycling, I mean, I obviously I do a fair bit of sport. For sport, I'm a runner these days rather than a cyclist. I cycle recreationally and for utility, but my competitive urges are all in running at the moment. And then beyond that, I am a keen musician. I played the piano all my life. I love playing piano, but my main musical focus at the moment is taiko drumming, which is Japanese drumming. I learned it when I was living in Japan in the late 1990s. It's a very spectacular physical form of drumming. The drums are big, the sticks are big, and the movements are big. You kind of drum with use your whole body. It's like kind of like a martial art. So it's visually spectacular. The resonance of the drums is incredible when you see a live performance of taiko drumming. You can feel the sound waves on your skin, on your chest, as well as hearing them and seeing it as well. So it's kind of spectacular art form that I love. And for any of your listeners who are in London around the weekend of the 23rd of November, we've got my group, which is called Taiko Meantime. Taiko spelled Taiko. Meantime, Greenwich Meantime. We've got a gig on November 23rd in Blackheath Halls. If anybody's interested in seeing that, I'd really appreciate it.
Cool. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. What were you doing in Japan in the late 90s? You mentioned it earlier. I kind of just brushed over it. What were you doing in Japan?
Yeah, I was teaching English. I graduated university in the mid-90s. My career plan at that point was to be a teacher. I'd already spent a year in France as part of my degree. I did a joint French and art history degree, did a year in France, loved it. I was teaching there as well. I thought I'd go and teach abroad. And there was a program called the JET program, which is still running now. It's in its early years then. But it was an initiative by the Japanese government to import Anglophone graduates to go and teach in high schools. To teach English, because the Japanese, God bless them, are the only they're the only nationality I've ever met who are actually worse at languages than the British. So they were very conscious of this. So they started importing graduates to teach English, but also to expose Japanese kids to more foreign influence and more international influence, because Japan has had a history of insularity, and they wanted to kind of do some PR for the country and also get Japanese people more used to Western faces. And I went and taught in a high school on the west coast of Japan, in a place called Ishikawa-ken. Most beautiful place I've ever been. Mountains on one side, sea on the other. So I wouldn't have had to choose between Cobbles and Cols. I could have both. And just had three of the most incredible, fascinating, culturally rich, rewarding, challenging years of my life teaching English in a high school out there.
Amazing. So then, maybe speaking of where you are now or where you've lived over the world, what's your favourite route? What's a route you kind of do, training loop, whatever it is? What is there any specific one that always stands out to you or brings back good memories?
Yeah, there's a couple. I actually wrote about this in the magazine just a couple of mags ago in our landscape mag. Any ride in Ishikawa-ken was beautiful. They have these. The mountains in Japan where I was were kind of forest. They went up to about 1,000 meters. I could see 3,000 meters from where I lived, but in the vicinity of my city, they were about the 1,000 meter range. They were forested, wooded mountains, absolutely stunning, steep valleys, but flat bottomed where they flattened the landscape for rice paddies. So you get this very abrupt, like cultivated rice paddies, and then straight up into basically jungle, and really quiet roads, beautifully engineered roads that you wouldn't see a single car on them. And these roads are called rindo. They're forest roads. They're kind of old thoroughfares, but the Japanese tend not to use them for anything, so they're absolutely perfect for cycling. And the memories I have of summer days cycling in those mountains, it's visceral. It's really the thickness of the air, the humidity and the warmth, and the smells and sights and feeling of being under that canopy of trees on beautifully engineered, beautifully serviced roads, which swooped and curved along the contours. Just my favourite place to cycle. And then I think there's nothing like home roads for cycling on. I grew up riding the roads around Exeter, especially on Dartmoor, and Dartmoor is still my favourite place to cycle. There's the main road over the moor. I say main road, it's not very wide and not very big, but you kind of gradually take steps up onto the moor. You kind of climb, descend a bit, climb, and then end up on the kind of the very open, bleak, almost agoraphobic expanse of kind of wild Dartmoor, and I find that landscape just compelling and atmospheric.
Is that near Porlock?
No, Porlock's Exmoor. That's another beautiful place to cycle. Yeah, Porlock, which has got it's a very famous climb up from to Porlock. Actually, it's one of the best climbs I've done.
Yeah. Anecdotally, my wife and I years ago, 2021, middle of one of the lockdowns. It's actually when I realised I was going to marry her, because we were sat outside in a pub that wouldn't let us in under an umbrella that was leaking on us. Anyway, we stayed at
Auspicious.
how auspicious. We sat in an Airbnb. We sat in an Airbnb. I took my bike with me, and I went up the ring road that goes all the way back there. But there's also another route that goes up onto this. Up to that, like Exmouth National Park, and you go over a cattle grid, and you go over a bit again. And I was like, going up this bit, I thought it was fine. It was like some bits 10, some bits like 15%, and I realised I actually cycled it on the correct side, because when you were coming down the other side, it was like 20-25%. Steaming disc brakes, that kind of thing. So yeah.
The Exmoor and Dartmoor are both like, I guess, the Pennines and North York Moors and Lake District. The road, the climbs do tend to be short and steep. I grew up cycling around on Dartmoor on a bike with 42 on the front and 21 on the back. I used to get off and walk quite a lot, because that is simply the wrong gear.
Yep.
That's all. That was a typical gear for bikes back then. But yeah, I grew up cycling on Dartmoor, and those the steep hills and the landscape. The kind of some people find it bleak, but I find it speaks to me very profoundly. That's my favourite rides are all around Dartmoor.
Amazing. I mean, so last question, a bit out of left field. Where do you sit on the white bib shorts? Are you a fan, or do you think they need to go?
No, yeah, they need to go. I don't know if I'm making myself unpopular here. No, I'm very much black shorts and plain national champions jerseys kind of guy. I think I love the simplicity and kind of retro aesthetic of plain black shorts with a kind of simple team jersey or a national champions jersey. Obviously, I don't go out wearing a national champions jersey. It's not the done thing. But I think on other people, I think that looks brilliant. Not many people have worn it better. Like the Fabian Cancellara in his Swiss champions jersey with black shorts. Not many people have worn it better.
I always think that the Cav World Championship look was one of the better ones. In the they did one that was like a Rafa quarter zip almost, had proper arms and things like that, and it was at that period when fabrics were technical, but they weren't now like skin suit aero arms. It was a really nice kind of crossover period where it kind of started getting better.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. He went for black shorts as well, didn't he?
He did go for black shorts. Yeah, Sagan went for black shorts as well. I always thought Sagan looked pretty smart in his. Yeah. I mean,
Mathieu van der Poel, the white shorts did suit him when he.
Yeah, they did. They look good.
And I'm not saying I like the way it looked, but I think he wore them properly, and that's all you can ask.
Amazing. Well, let's come to the time on the podcast. Thank you for being with us this week. Why don't you remind people?
It's been really interesting.
No, of course. Why don't you tell people where they can find you, and then maybe close out the show.
You can find me in person at Rouleur Live, obviously. Tickets still available. A few tickets still available. We've almost sold out, but a few tickets available. So find me in person there, or you can find me on the internet. I'm still holding out on X, the dwindling number of people on X, but I'm Edward Pickering on X and Instagram.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Ed, for coming on, and everybody else. We'll see you next week or at Rouleur Live.
See you next week at Rouleur Live.
See ya. Bye.